once again, this is the place, we're hoping that this is the place where, you know, intellectual honesty is actually practiced. We were talking a bit on this morning's show about being intellectually kind, intellectually patient. And so hopefully you're coming to the place tonight with a lot of questions, the kind of questions that would say, I would like to wrap my mind around deism, because we have someone on the show tonight who is a deist and extremely articulate in putting that particular argument forward. And so before we bring Shanna and also Ozzy on the show, I would like to bring in my co-host, and that would be Bob. Welcome, Bob.
Well, how you doing? It's good to be here again. And we just spent an awesome hour slapping around linguistics and having some fun with that. But yeah, I love these discussions that we have. And I've had a couple of conversations in the past that involved Shanna as a member of that discussion, and of course we've often spoken with Ozzy. He's one of our favorites, and we enjoy him a lot.
I really like the tension, the excitement that we had the other night with Ozzy. You and Ozzy just had this wonderful conversation. It was like having dinner with a big glass of wine and saying, "Wow, let's just go for it." It was wonderful.
Oh, I think we both had a great deal of fun. It was stimulating. Both had a great deal of fun with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully people will get that we do enjoy people. And so this is not the place for, just theists, but this is the place for theists, atheists, deists, and everything else in life. And so hopefully that makes sense to people. But if it doesn't, just be patient and kind to us, and we might move an inch or two this way or that way.
We even have room for fill in the blankists.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I'm going to take a back seat tonight, but I want to bring in our special guest tonight. I would like to welcome you, Shanna, Rockey, to the show. Welcome to the place tonight.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
I'm hoping that that you will be able to put on the table what so many people are looking for. They want, the kind of argument that says, wow, this is where you need to be. That would be a wonderful thing to do here at the place tonight. And so hopefully that will be done. Is that putting too much pressure on?
Oh, no, that's no pressure at all.
Okay, good. Okay, Ozzy, it's always exciting to have you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be on the show. And let me just say, it was in fact terrific fun locking horns with Bob Graves last Wednesday night. I thought it was a terrific exchange. I think if people haven't seen that yet, you might want to watch it, because you're going to get to see me in a rare moment of emotional peak. You're going to see me get a little testy with Bob, which is not very characteristic of me, least of all with Bob. But I think it happened with Bob because I hold Bob in high regard, and when I think that he's really wrong, it felt important to me to tell him, and we went at it, and it was fun.
In spite of it was wrong, it was very important that you tell me.
Yes, it was I thought he was wrong, and I felt it important that he know it, and he thought I was probably full of it too, and he told me. But it was great. So I encourage people to go back and watch that if you haven't seen it. It's the kind of thing that can go on here is because there's a lot of mutual respect, and people credit each other with intelligence, and they try to be civil. It's possible to disagree strenuously and vociferously and seriously with all sincerity and still remain friends. And I mean, I now have a better understanding of Bob's position than I did before. I'm not more convinced that he's correct, of course. I still think he's incorrect. That doesn't have to happen. It's not important that we necessarily change one another's minds. But I mean, this is the kind of thing that can happen. And I'm hoping that this is the kind of thing that can happen with tonight's discussion, because I think deism is one of the the most important positions in the landscape of the Great Debate, and it's one that is under discussed and not treated with sufficient seriousness. And speaking as an atheist, at least a provisional atheist, it is, I think, the most serious form of belief in God, and it's the one that I think atheists ought to be prepared to encounter. I think it's all too easy to argue against certain forms of religion, of theology, of, for instance, the Abrahamic faiths. But deism, I think, poses some special challenges.
I so agree. One of the things that I missed the other night was the igloo. I'm hoping at some point in time during a winter month, maybe we can take a remote camera and you can be in the igloo and you can argue with Bob. What do you think?
I'd love that if I can do if I can get a Wi-Fi connection or something like that from an igloo.
Yeah,
I'd be happy to do it. I don't know where I can build an igloo where I'm going to have internet access though.
Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds chillingly awesome.
Anywhere that we can have a cell phone connection, we can do it because we can broadcast right through the stream. But that's a different show. That's not tonight's show. Let me make some comments just before I get out of here because I want to give enough room and enough time for this discussion to be had. I'm hoping that our audience will take everything they think that theism is out of the discussion tonight. Try to listen carefully to what's being stated about deism, and I think that will help a lot. In other words, let's not carry a lot of baggage into this conversation. Let's put that on the shelf for a while and do some listening because I think that we're going to hear some substance tonight that will make sense. And with that said, Bob, take it.
Yeah, well, Shanna, it's nice to. I should say you look super tonight. The red vest and everything. I've had other conversations with you in the past, just in hangouts where we happen to be there together, and I know that you have a video where you've been asked so many times, and I'm gonna really ask it again, but because it's necessary for today's show, what is deism?
Well, I do get that a lot, and I feel like a broken record when I say it, but I'll say it again. It's the belief in a god or gods or creator of some kind based on reason and observation of the natural world. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, deism.
And so that would cover a lot of ground. In fact, many theists who are not necessarily fully traditional would say, well, that's me.
Yeah, I guess there's a little tag on the end where it's also the rejection of special revelation,
right?
Like prophecy, miracles, intervention, direct intervention, at least with mankind. That's generally rejected with deists as well.
I agree with Ozzy that for some reason we overlook deism when we get involved in so many different discussions. And I was curious if you, being a deist, if you have any reason of ideas as to why is it that we overlook this? And then I have a follow-up question to that, which would be, so how did you become a voice that a lot of people were starting to listen to? Why is deism something we kind of overlook, and how is it you made it something that we're not overlooking anymore, in a sense, at least in these circles?
Oh dear. Well, why I think it's overlooked is, one, it's not as juicy as some of the other things that people get to discuss when you talk about the Abrahamic religions or the revealed religions. I don't have a God to offer anybody that wants to burn them later, or where there's all of these scriptures involved, and it's just not as juicy, I think. I'm sure that there's a lot more to it though. And as far as why people listen to me and why we're talking about deism, I can't answer that without sounding like I'm full of myself.
Well, can I answer on her behalf? Because
please answer on my behalf.
Shanna's too modest here. Shanna's been involved in the Great Debate community for I don't know, maybe 2 years now or something like that. Is that about right?
Yeah, it's been roughly 2 years.
Yeah, about 2 years, and in that time, she's actually been quite prolific. She's been involved in a lot of hangouts. a lot of hangouts where she is the only person representing deism, and she doesn't go out there trying to represent deism, but she is in fact a deist. And so when people who are atheists are talking to her and they hear that she believes in a god, they assume that she's a traditional theist. And then so she has to disabuse people of the misconceptions that they have about her, because they don't know what a deist is. And so people are sort of, I've never met one of you before. You're like, you're like a unicorn. You're a different kind of thing, right? And then she gets the same kind of thing from traditional theists and fundamentalists who in a hangout who hit her with questions and objections and assume that she must be some kind of atheist or something like that. And then it leaves the same kind of impression. And she's also very active in comments and things like that under videos and on Google Plus pages. She's the owner of the largest philosophy of religion community on Google Plus with over 100,000 members. And so she has there and in other Google Plus communities defended her views and stated her views and argued with people. So consequently, her name has gotten around, there you go. I mean, there's just not a lot of people representing it, and she's very articulate, especially in writing.
Yeah, well, I think that I hear what you're saying here, and it's not so much that people deliberately ignore it. I think in some ways it's an option that a lot of people don't stop to think about. And since there aren't a lot of people who are deists talking about it, it kind of gets it slips between the cracks, and therefore we don't hear much about it. I'm curious a little bit though about do you think that it's possible that a semi-deism is probably the most common form of belief that exists in the human race? And by that I mean there are a lot of people who attend a Christian church and they believe in God, but they kind of believe in Jesus, but not necessarily. And they believe in a God that might be personal, but they're not sure. And so it's kind of like a half deism. And I think there's people involved in all kinds of religions that they're kind of persuaded of that, well, through reason and observation of the natural world. They can come to this conclusion, but they're not necessarily sold on the particulars of the culture that they're part of. Do you get the impression, or is now you being a deist might see this differently than I have? I get the impression that's probably one of the most common positions for people who don't stop to really try to come up with a clear stated position. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you hear a lot of the spiritual but not religious, and it wouldn't take a lot of effort to throw them into a deist category, I suppose. Or I meet a lot of atheists that they became atheists after they tumbled out of their Christianity, but they'll follow up with, but I think there might be something. Some of the arguments make sense, just the Bible doesn't make sense. It's like, well, that's not exactly atheism. So I mean,
right?
Yeah.
You mentioned something that too many people assume that atheism means not Christian, and that's probably because until recently here in the United States of America, we're the only ones here, and we're kind of in control, and so everything else is either. It's not just that it's irrelevant; it just doesn't exist. So atheists are not Christians, but are there now? I would imagine at first it would be sort of confusing, and I say that because as a teacher, I find that when I begin talking about something that isn't one thing or the other that most people think of dichotomously, it's so hard to get them into a totally different paradigm. So do you find that you spend more time than you thought you would have to clarifying what it is and what it isn't as people draw assumptions?
That's what I spend most of my time doing. Is trying to explain. There's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of assumptions that are made, and I have to work through those for hours weeks, months before I can actually have a conversation. Because a lot of people do have kind of that dichotomy that you were talking about. It's either Christianity or it's atheism. Well, I'm not a Christian, therefore I'm an atheist. And then they'll, and I'm not trying to steal a lot of credit, but I might be doing it a little, and that's okay. But then they'll, go out and they'll read up on different books or, talk with different people in atheism communities and whatnot, and then they feel good about their position. It's like, okay, look, but did you realize that there's other things going on? It's not actually theism or atheism. And they can't, some of them can't hear that.
Right. We've had a number of people in the past that people wouldn't think of as deists who actually probably were, or at least fit loosely in. Well, before we get there, I should say that one of the things you've mentioned, I've heard you talk about, is that deism is not a very distinctly defined specific position, but rather it's a general category that covers a wide variety of people who may differ considerably in various ways. And so, having said that, in history, who are some of the people that you have acknowledged as fitting into this under this very wide umbrella?
Oh, oh, I'm gonna get hate mail. Who are some of them? Mark Twain, Einstein, Da Vinci. Who are some of the other ones? Oz, help me out.
Yeah, Aristotle.
Aristotle, yeah, there's one.
Arguably David Hume in some of his moods.
Yeah, depending on the mood.
Yeah.
Would it be possible that, although it's not politically correct, probably almost all presidents of the United States were deists?
Yeah, some of the founding fathers. Yeah, some of the founding fathers clearly were deists.
Yeah.
Thomas Paine famously, he wasn't a president or anything like that, but he was one of the founding fathers. And there were a lot of Enlightenment figures. That's when deism sort of came into its own,
right?
And was most fully articulated. And I know that Shanna is sort of a fan of The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine, right?
Big fan.
Yeah, that's a good place. That's a really good resource actually for anyone who's interested in deism and thinks that it's just another form of theism. Read Thomas Paine's The Age of Reason. That will thoroughly disabuse you of this idea that this is just watered down theism or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Just as I said that I think there's probably far more presidents in the United States who were really deists than the Christians they may have appeared to have been. Do you think that there's also, and I've heard this, but I've not studied my history well enough to be able to say, oh no, that's not true. But I get the impression that, from what I've been told, that there were people who identified as deists in the past who were actually atheists, but stating themselves to be deists in, say, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, was a safer position to take for people who were at least you acknowledge there's a God. Do you think that there's any truth to that, or what? Or that some people use the label as a way of trying to avoid the consequences of being known as an atheist?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. Especially back, throughout history, not believing in a God. I mean, you could be killed for that. Believing in the wrong God, you could be killed for that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and I still get it to this day. The kind of that comment that you made me cringe a little. They're like, oh, well, at least you believe in a God. You're halfway there.
Right. Yeah.
So, I can definitely see people in history. I know that you didn't mean it that way, but I have gotten that from people. So I wouldn't be surprised if these historical figures did the same thing.
You're approaching being acceptable as a human being, so that's wonderful.
You're halfway there, kiddo. Just keep it up. We'll get you there.
Now, what would you say it would take for deism to be at least considered? And to me, I think we're all better off if we try to understand various positions without regard to whether we accept them or reject them or whatever, but to understand, what do you think what would be the merits of having a wider understanding of this, and what it's going to take to make that understanding of what deism is more common?
That's a big question. I think that it would take teaching children logic and philosophy at a young age.
Yeah.
And that's my honest answer.
Yeah.
I honestly think that that people have a hard time talking about things without being emotional, without taking them personally, without remembering, how screwed up their childhood was or how much something hurt them, say like with Christianity. And I think it takes a lot of work to just appreciate and respect having a good conversation, just to find whether you think it's true or not. But just to have a good conversation, I think that takes a lot of mindfulness and a lot of patience, a little compassion, and I think that's kind of hard to teach adults. So teaching philosophy and logic to children.
In some way, not that you were trying to skirt around it, but it sounds to me like we're also mentioning the fact that too many people in the discussion are already too busy reacting to their past to be able to enter into the discussion and just kind of let go of the baggage and
right.
forget about it all. Yeah.
One thing that came to mind, Bob, when you asked that question about what would it take to get more people to take deism seriously, and it has to do with this business of reaction. If we could just imagine that the traditional forms of theism and the dogmatic creeds were to just evaporate, and then you ask people to sort of consider whether or not a creator exists, right? To take seriously the possibility of creator, and the word creator was not larded, was not freighted with all of the ugly theological baggage and dogmatic posturing. If that wasn't there, people could take the notion more seriously and weigh it and evaluate it. And I think a lot more people would who already self-identify as atheists because they are anti-theistic. They're motivated by an anti-theism. A lot of those people, I think, would entertain the concept of deism and possibly embrace it. So that's one of the reasons I think that actually deism has to be taken seriously. Part of the reason it's not taken seriously, though, is that it's seen as, you're using the G word, the God word. Oh, if you're using the God word, well, I hate this whole God talk stuff for all these other reasons, because of all this crazy stuff that these other people believe and are wedded to. Well, you're talking God talk. I won't have any truck with that. I won't put up with it. And I think deism, I think, gets short shrift and gets swept aside prematurely. The baby is going out with the bathwater.
Yeah, if we were to shoot a rocket towards the sun and it ends up really headed out towards Saturn instead, it's way off course. But if we shoot this rocket to explore the sun and it misses the sun by just, miles, still misses, I wonder if a lot of people, be they theists or atheists, feel that deism is a slippery slope. But I mean, when I think about it, I can see why they might think it's a slippery slope, but there's nothing at the bottom of the slope except deism.
Yeah.
So it's not. It's actually perhaps not really a slippery slope. It's just ground you're not used to walking on. I would wonder, when did you become a deist? And was your trip through a variety of different considerations?
No, I guess I became a deist when I read what deism is. I wasn't raised in a very religious household. I mean, my mother's a Catholic, my stepfather's a Baptist, and they were only that in name. And they wanted my brother and I to grow up and have the opportunity to just kind of assess these things as adults, which we did. And I guess through some of my readings and just over the years, I came to some of the conclusions that I did. I looked at the arguments for and against a creator, and I looked at the arguments for a creator, and then I looked at its, possible rebuttals or refutations, and I wasn't very impressed with those. They didn't seem to hold their ground. And then there's Oz is going to get me.
Go ahead.
In a nice way.
Good company.
But yes, I know. I'm in excellent company. Inference to the best explanation, that sort of thing. Then what other explanations are on the table, if any, and do they hold any water? Do they have any explanatory power? Things like that. And then I came to my, I found it more likely than not, made more sense to me, and seemed to fit the evidence the best, that the universe was some sort of creation by a mind. And then maybe a few years later, I read about deism. There's a lot of wind. There, that's better. And that was it. And I was, well, I guess that's where I fit.
Now, would someone be able to a comeback to that, or a pushback that I could hear somebody wanting to make is this: we find that when a person understands something, people don't just understand things; they understand things in relation to other things they already understand, et cetera, et cetera. And so, our the way we put it all together is in some ways a paradigm. And so one has to ask the question: is it the paradigm, or is it the actual reason and observation? And is it possible that the reason and the observation just works well within the paradigm, but the reason and observation might also work equally well in a different paradigm, and that this is just a paradigm you're comfortable with? I mean, have you thought about that kind of aspect? Like, for example, like the optical illusions, how it looks this way and every line fits and it's a goodness of fit. But if you're already predisposed to seeing the optical illusion as this sort of thing, then that's what it looks like. And it really is there. And I say this because psychological studies, when we can lead a person into a particular optical illusion they've never seen before, by kind of pre-vetting them and actually manipulating them without their realizing it, they will begin to see it. And sometimes they'll need to reach what we might call a cognitive crisis level before they can realize it's an illusion. I'm just curious if you've ever thought about that.
If deism's a comfort thing for me, is that essentially what you're asking?
No, just that would be that's saying too much in terms of but just saying that you're talking about how it's believed that reason and observation of the natural world is sufficient to come to this conclusion, and I'm saying, what if it really is sufficient to come to that conclusion? But what if you had a different paradigm, those same observations and that same reasoning capacity could actually be sufficient for some other conclusion? And now this is the agnostic in me talking, basically.
I can paraphrase. I speak Bob.
Do you speak Bob? Because that would be super.
Okay. You know what's really funny? Sometimes when Bob will ask me a question like that, I'm puzzled and I'm going, what is he asking me? When I hear Bob asking another person that question, I go, oh yeah, I know what he's saying there. But when he asks me, I sort of freeze like a deer in headlights, and I'm like, what's he asking? So I guess maybe another way to put it is, when you consider the arguments and the reasons for deism, the arguments that you think conduce to that conclusion, would you be prepared to say that that all of that evidence and all of those reasons could be construed differently to a completely different conclusion, either a theistic conclusion or an atheistic conclusion or an agnostic conclusion? In other words, do you think that the evidence is so strong that it compels that it compels a conclusive confidence in deism, or is it just a matter of, no, wait a minute, if I just look at the data slightly differently, I could end up believing something quite different? Or do you think that the evidence really points very solidly in one direction, and that
well, it's still kind of strange. Obviously, yes, I think that it points in one direction, else I wouldn't be sitting in the position I am. I do see how it could be, I see how a case could be made for atheism on some of the same evidence, some of the same arguments. But I don't know about theism now. I don't think so. I can't think.
What about agnosticism, though?
And of course, keeping in mind that also is a very blanket term that covers a wide variety of
right.
unknowing. Yeah. To me, it's a curious question, and and I find myself often confronted with that kind of question by myself more than anyone else. In fact, sometimes I found that I've had to try harder to ask myself questions people haven't gotten around to asking it. But anyhow, I was just curious if to what degree the paradigm might fit in. If, for example, even though I'm an agnostic, I identify as an agnostic theist, and I've had to be honest about the fact that even though I am a theist, maybe I'm just, in ways I don't realize or don't understand or haven't really been able to see, because I'm so I'm so immersed in the water I can't see it. That that I just, to me, the assumption that this is God is just something that I'm assuming, and I although I don't think so, I can see how that might be possible, so. But I suppose any of us, if we're going to try and be realistic, are going to recognize that, well, there's all sorts of things that could be wrong with the way I'm putting things together. So.
Yeah, there could be a lot wrong with the way I'm putting things together, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Welcome to the human race. We're all getting used to this.
Right, yeah. This is my first try, so.
Yeah, right. As far as we know. Although, people used to talk to me about reincarnation, and to me, I used to laugh at the idea of reincarnation, and the main reason was because, do the math. How many people are alive today and during your lifetime, and look at population growths. I'm sorry, there just isn't enough human lives to go around to allow for this thing to be. And then someone suggested to me, well, what if we have reiterated this possibility of life in a latent form on other planets, other systems? Well, okay, I guess then I can't just entirely throw that idea out. But as far as I'm aware of, this is the only life I've ever had, and the only one I know for certain I will have. But anyway, so which brings me to another question in understanding deism. Deism is a sense of just what is the case, but it is not necessarily a statement about what is to come. For example, right. What will be after death?
Right. See, that depends on the deist you get a hold of.
Right.
Some deists believe in an afterlife. Some deists believe in reincarnation. Some deists believe that it's, that's it. You're done and dusted. Off you go.
Some people would wonder that, we just kind of return to that energy, and maybe that hard problem of consciousness is really that spark of the divine in each of us, borrowed maybe even unwittingly to the God that creates, and it just sort of returns. Who knows? I mean, there's all sorts of possibilities we can think of. I had another question about deism, and it just popped out of my mind. It'll come back, but anyway.
I have one, actually,
sure,
if I could. Okay. Well, this is a question that when I talk about deism, people will ask me, and I know Shanna's been asked this as well. What are the doctrines and creeds of deism, right? Because people hear, you're a deist, you believe in a deity, that means you believe in a God, you believe in a God, that's a religion, therefore deism is a religion. So what are the creeds and doctrines of this religion, right? I mean, there's no holy books, but you got to believe something. Otherwise, how could this be a religion? There's got to be some creed or doctrines. What are they?
Is this a trick question?
No. I mean, what are they? What are the creeds and doctrines of deism? If you're a deist, what are you committed to believing? Right? Do you have to believe in souls and an afterlife?
I guess the only thing that you would really be committed to believing is that the universe is a creation of some kind.
Right. Yeah. And now Ozzy really, he's asking a question that he knows a lot of people would have, and the truth is, I know that Ozzy knows better than to ask that question.
Yeah. No. I'm asking it because I want to disabuse people of this idea that.
Right. Yes.
And I'll confess this a bit of ignorance here that Shanna talked me out of, like a long time ago. I always thought of deism as a religion. But it's not. Just because the word God is part of a person's outlook on the world, it doesn't mean that they're committed to religion, or that they belong to a religion, or that their view is a religious one.
The
right?
closest it comes is being a philosophy.
That's right. It's a philosophical position. It's a position about how did all of this get here, right? That's a philosophical claim, right? Now, one can say, all religions are part of, religions are themselves philosophical positions, just like atheism is a philosophical position, just like philosophical naturalism is a philosophical position. And so deism is a philosophical position, but not all. So maybe all religions are philosophical positions, but not all philosophical positions are religions. And deism, I would submit, is not a religion, but it sort of gets tarred with the same brush. And so people bring to bear a lot of these prejudices that they have against religions. Some of them I think are well warranted. Some of them are just false stereotypes. But deism sort of gets swept away because people attach the word religion to God and think that, well, deists must have some kind of creed, that this is some kind of stealth theism.
Yeah. Ozzy, I have a question for you, and the reason that's for you is because a deist might not be able to answer this question well. What's the harm in being a deist, and what, if from an atheist standpoint, is it seen as dangerous? And I would wonder if some do see it that way.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And this is something that, as a result of the dialogues I've had with Shanna, this has been brought home to me that atheists really do see deism as a kind of threat, as you said, a slippery slope to something. People think that if people are permitted and if to believe that there's a creator, if the idea of a creator is made somehow intellectually respectable, that this is a license for everybody else who believes in a creator to believe all that other crazy stuff that they might believe, all those other dogmas that they believe on insufficient evidence. So I think that for most atheists, especially people who self-identify as atheists, who are activists in their atheism, trying to get the opprobrium and stigma of atheism removed from atheists by the religious, they see deism as part and parcel of all of that, and they do see deism as a threat. They want to get that. They want all God talk to be discredited. I don't think that there's any threat in the forms of deism that I've heard of. Now some deists, or some people who self-identify as deists, I think don't properly qualify as deists. Like, for instance, there's another fellow in the Google Plus community who self-identifies as a deist. His name is Skylar Fiction. Very nice fellow. He believes in a creator God. He believes that everything around us is created by a God. But I think, strictly speaking, he doesn't really qualify as a deist. I think he misidentifies himself as a deist. And the reason I say he misidentifies himself as a deist is because he bases it solely on private experiences and intuition. And not by looking at nature and in the light of reason and using the book of nature, which is traditionally how deism is to be understood.
Although I wouldn't necessarily discount that as a legitimate window. Certainly, one shouldn't limit themselves to that particular window, but that is a window which may say something, even if we don't know what it says. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that one has to discount that kind of evidence, but that's not part of how deism is to be understood. Deism, properly understood, is the view that a consideration of the natural world, of facts that are intersubjectively available to us, point to, don't necessitate the conclusion, but strongly suggest or point to the conclusion that the world is an artifact, that the world is the creation of an intelligent mind of some sort. And so it's by the light of reason, and it's by consulting the book, and the book with a capital B is the book of nature, or nature with a capital N. So now, if that is what deism is, I think an atheist has nothing to fear from this. Right? It's just these people have come to a different philosophical conclusion. Such people, I think, can be disabused of this view if it's incorrect through good arguments. And if you can't, they might actually talk you out of your view. Right? I mean, so none of the liabilities and the socially pernicious considerations that are concerns that we have about a lot of organized religions are part of deism.
Right.
So I just see it as there's nothing there to fear. And if you think that the view is somehow based in superstition, then of course then it behooves you to show where the errors in the reasoning are. But you can't just sort of sweep it aside. And you certainly can't prejudge the case for deism on the basis that it's got to be the same case that a theist would make.
Yeah, I would also think that, and I'm sure, Ozzy, you'd agree with this, that the moment a person is saying, well, we just can't allow this idea any merit, right there, you're saying, well, we just can't allow an idea any merit of intellectual integrity. I think you've sacrificed your intellectual integrity right there with that attitude, because things need to be accepted and rejected for proper reasons. And through proper process, not just because, well, we can't allow something like that. Who are the people, Shanna, that would push back the hardest in your experience with what you're sharing?
Oh, the ones I get the most resistance from are people who are freshly, like, brand new baby atheists, or the real fundy Christians. And for the most part.
They have trouble with everybody, though, I think, yes.
Yeah, they're just mad. That's fun. They're stinkers. But that's where I get the most pushback.
Have you ever had the pleasure of dealing with the presuppositionalists?
I have. They're stinkers too.
Yeah, but they have a hard time with deists.
Yeah, they really do. It's a lot of fun to watch.
Yes, because you're kind of in their area now. One of the things that I have thought about, don't really know what to think about, when I read about Jesus, I'm reading between the lines. I think that the story as it has come to us is washed over, rinsed quite a few times, and that what Jesus was really doing and what he was all about was something slightly different from the story that comes. Do you ever get the impression that Jesus himself may have actually been a deist, but tried as safely as he could to push back against Judaism and the way it was abusing the disenfranchised people he reached out to? I ask that question because, his very first sermon, as it were, he gets up there and he says, "You've heard it said, but I tell you," he's pushing back on Moses. He's often credited with saying certain things that, although they get turned into some sort of religious nonsense, he's really trying to tell people it's okay. Have you ever wondered if Jesus himself may have actually been a deist?
That's such a fun question. Right now, currently, no. In my early 20s, I kind of thought, he kind of sounds like a deist if you take away all of the mean stuff that goes on. But eventually I got to the point where I couldn't just take that out arbitrarily, because obviously I'm just getting rid of the stuff I don't like and saying, oh, look, deist, and that's not okay. But there are a fair amount of deists, and then there are Christian deists who believe that Jesus was a deist himself.
Yeah, of course, I would say that you're right. You can't just get rid of the statements that, well, you don't like those ones. But I do think that there can be linguistic arguments offered for how some of them come with a very different language flux. Sometimes
right, of course. Right.
Telling a story, and then they switch to giving an explanation to try to shape the way you understand the implications. And sometimes that sounds like a different author or at least a tradition, particularly when you realize how much time passed between these events and when they finally get written. So who knows what happened to those stories and what ruts they developed in getting there. So that's when I say, when reading between the lines, I'm wondering if what we're reading isn't an accurate representation, but that something else is behind it. I've wondered that myself. He resists using the name Yahweh, or Adonai. He talks about Abba instead, but then again, you're right, though. There are places that are overly mysterious and overly powerfully theistic, in at least the way that it has come down to us. Where do you see it going? Has your deism modified in any significant way, or has it just simply become a little more detailed, a little more corroborated over time, or do you see it evolving?
Yeah, it's always evolving. It's always growing. I go through. It's almost like a roller coaster at times. There's times where I'm very confident. I'm like, oh yeah, I've got this. I nailed this. This is it. I'm a freaking genius. And then there's other times where I'm like hanging by a thread. Just it depends on what I'm reading, who I'm reading, what I'm learning at the time. But it's always evolving. It's always expanding. It's changed a couple of times, but not. I don't know about significantly.
Yeah. Now you said something there that really I resonate with, and then maybe Ozzy can speak to this too. You say that sometimes it depends on who I've been reading. It is amazing when you start reading someone who speaks well. It is amazing how easy you can get sucked into something there because they speak so well, and then later you run into somebody else who also speaks well, but then and then you begin to realize I'm more adrift than I realized. And so it helps us, I think, to see how much more, either how much more work we have to do, or how much work can't be done, or something. But anyway, I think it's a very common thing for most people to go through the ebb and flow of the sense of just how wonderful this seems to be clear, and then other times how. I know that although I am an agnostic theist and no longer, I used to be a fundamentalist pastor, but there were times when I would be, I could go all the way from hating the idea of God to just totally surrendered to it, and it was a tough thing to always, there was no stability to it. It was, and of course, I actually think there's more stability in the directions that I've finally taken. But then again, that could be I'm 63. I'm getting up there, and I've been around this block so many times. I've seen almost everything on it, and I've probably grown accustomed to the other things on it that I no longer see them. So I guess I'm stuck. I'm going to die this way. It's just
there you go.
The way it is.
I had a thought about what you said about reading someone who speaks well or writes well or something like that. That is actually like a great exercise. Go out and read something like Thomas Paine's The Age of Reason, or read something by Henry David Thoreau or something like that. Right? These deists there's another name, Henry David Thoreau, someone we suggested earlier. These people who were very articulate proponents of deism, when you read their work, and you're not reading a Wikipedia article, right? When you're not reading the bullet points, when you're reading the thoughtful considerations of a sophisticated mind, someone who's sort of weighed this position and worn it the whole of their life, and is prepared to advance it over and against other positions that you might be more familiar with, and you read that in a sustained work, it washes over you. Okay, it's like sitting in the tub. It's a difference between taking a quick rinse in the shower and soaking in the tub. When you soak in someone else's ideas for a while, you drink it in, and you get to try it on. And that's the nice thing about reading a book. That long exposure, that relationship that you build with an idea and an author in the course of a book, as opposed to an article in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or a Wikipedia article on the subject. When you steep yourself in it, you see the sense in it. You try it on. You get to wear it while you're reading the book, and that puts you in a position of being able to see, this is what is so appealing about it intellectually. This is what is emotionally satisfying about it. This is what is intellectually compelling about it, right? Or this is what I find unappealing about it, right? Sometimes it goes the other way, but it's nice to sort of steep yourself, in this tub of an idea, and try it on. And I think it's really only then that you're in a position to say, okay, I've lived with this idea a little bit. You don't have to pretend to believe it, right? But the sustained exposure to an idea by someone who is good with words is really important. You owe it to yourself to do this kind of thing. And then, go ahead, read all the articles, for and against the idea. And so I always recommend that people do that. I've recommended the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis to people for that, because I think that's a fairly sustained and thoughtful treatment of the traditional Christian doctrines. Even though I disagree with it profoundly, it is a thoughtful book that works that way, and so I would recommend if anybody's curious about deism, Thomas Paine's The Age of Reason is a really good place to start. It's well written. It's clear. It's written in a slightly older style. The sentences tend to be a little bit long, but you only have to read about 20 pages before you're used to the style, right?
I knew this fellow was a philosophy professor, and the guy was just brilliant. And he was a co-director with me of an organization once for a while. We called it the Center for Contemporary Spirituality, and he was more of a Buddhist scholar, although he wasn't a Buddhist. And we had another fellow in there who was a professor of philosophy and a Jew. And although I wasn't a philosophy professor of any sort, I was coming there from a more Christian type, more of a modernized Christian. But there was one time we were in a public meeting and we were discussing something, and somebody said something quite disparaging about sacrificial systems, which, of course, I'm not one of these people who believe in atonement, but this professor offered an argument, a Jewish argument for sacrifice that he didn't believe in, but he offered it so clearly and so succinctly that it's almost like pulls you in. and he had this ability, if he was going to cover a wide variety of topics, that he could share with you some of the best of the ideas that were there in favor of it, and while you're starting to fall over in that direction, then the next day he comes back and he puts you in an entirely different direction. So my favorite teachers were people who could cover a topic so compellingly that you realize that and part of the lesson there is you find yourself getting jerked back and forth, and you realize how easy it is to be led along, and how hard it is to make sure that that's not what you're doing. By the way, this fellow was he's also a psychoanalyst, a therapist. But one of the things that when I got to know this fellow is when I first got to know him, he was a pastor, but he never shared his own opinion on things. You've asked him a question, he would tell you what various different scholars said. And I asked him, I said, why is it you never say, well, I think? And he said that he decided a long time ago he didn't want any disciples. And so he decided he would try to point people towards ideas that other people had expressed and articulated well. And he could do it. I mean, that's hard to do. Think about it. From this moment on, I will shut up. I will say nothing. I will just quote other people. Tough to do, but he was very good at it. But for me, it was a lesson in how easy it is to think of an idea and make sense of it, and then realize that something else might make sense. Anyhow, so where do you see the future? We were although things have evolved, in what way do you think you see yourself changing, or that you see deism changing? Or do you think it's going to change in terms of its popularity?
Well, I'm going to try that one question at a time. As far as me, which kind of ties into what you two were just discussing, when I first read Thomas Paine, was that guy on fire, and I was an angry deist. I was angry with Christians, and I was angry with atheists, and I think Thomas Paine says somewhere, I think in the first part of the book, says, trust no man who holds himself accountable to no one. And I'm like, yeah, good, trust those atheists that don't hold themselves accountable. And he says that the Creator ought to be worshipped, in however people see fit, but that this God ought to be worshipped and ought to be prayed to. And just because of the way that he wrote, and because there was so much passion, and just the way that he presents everything, there's just a lot of fire in that man. I walked away from that book for a few months, maybe longer, agreeing and thinking the same thing, and then I kind of had to step back, like, wait, I don't believe this. I don't think that a person has to hold themselves accountable to a higher power to be trustworthy. That's nonsense. Right. But so in some ways that's how it's evolved. I've kind of stepped away from ideas like that I've read from some of these older authors, and some of the ideas that they had that sounded beautiful at the time, and I was really swept up in their writings. And then I
think that in years gone by, don't you think that there was more of a cultural attitude about accountability too? So most people probably bent towards wanting to find some way of including that in whatever it is they were doing. Although I'd have a hard time. How do you be accountable? By the way, my dad was a very religious Episcopalian, but he wasn't a standard Episcopalian. He had some unique ideas, and actually, it was many of the things that Einstein said that had a huge influence on my dad's personal theology. He wasn't a theologian. He was an engineer, a metallurgist, metal specialist. But he certainly was affected by that kind of deism that backed him off of certain ideas. In fact, when he was first married, my dad, creep that he was to have said this, he told my mother when they first married that she was headed to hell because she didn't become a baptized Christian until later in life, and he was reading the verse, "If you don't come as a little child." Well, sorry, and of course that was she made sure that he dropped that notion.
I bet.
But anyway, do you find what's the process people go through if they're influenced by deism? Is it suddenly that it hits them? Do they have to go through some sort of a crisis with their own ideas, or can they just slowly consider these ideas and kind of slip in, or what have you seen about
it depends. It depends so heavily on the kind of person, and their experiences, what they've been through, what took them or what brought them to the position that they're currently in. If I talk to, like, let's say a Christian who's not a crazy fundy and wants everybody to burn, and not an atheist that thinks anybody that believes in God is an idiot, just a casual, because we kind of see I think we see a lot of each end of the spectrum here, like in the YouTube community and on the internet. But I think when I walk up and talk to normal people about these things, if they so happen to want to have the conversation, it's not that hard to kind of edge them away from where they're at, because it's just not. It's not, because there's a lot of things that are in the Bible that they've never even read. And the same thing with atheists. I've literally had an atheist before say to me, "What's deism?" And then I'd explain, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's what I believe."
Right. Yeah.
So it varies.
It's amazing when we haven't really thought of where the width and breadth can be, and the distinctions. Yeah. By the way, we actually have Daryl with us tonight, and I wanted to. Daryl, you've been keeping an eye on some of the comments that are coming in. What are your thoughts so far? What you've been hearing us chat about?
Well, first of all, I would just say that I love it. I think this is wonderful. If someone had presented the notion to me that you could have a panel with a atheist, a theist, a deist, and just have a wonderful conversation and among wonderful people, I would have said, no, that'll never happen. And here we are. I just think this is great. But I do have a question, and it may be obvious. It's probably already been answered, but if I could be specific, it might be helpful if there is an answer that could be given in brief. And that would be, could we just make an obvious distinction between theism and deism, even possibly through the terms themselves? Because one thing that I've noticed is I've never heard of a deist. There's a theist, and then there's atheist, and there's deist, but I've never heard of an atheist. And so we could make the comparison between the two. What would be the greatest distinguishing factor between theism and deism?
Well, I think that there's a couple. In my view, the primary one being that deists reject, like I said before, special revelation, prophecy, intervention, miracles, things like that. Scriptures, so that falls into that category as well. And the position of deism is, it's not a faith-based position, if that makes sense. And I know that there's a lot of theists out there that don't think that their position is faith-based as well, and I get that, and I'm not saying all of them, but deism as it stands is just not what it is.
It's a conclusion, not a stab in the dark, as it was.
Right.
Right.
It's a conclusion. It's an answer to that philosophical question. It's
so
an
there's
answer
a sense
to
here,
that.
the answer that distinguishes it from theism is what it is not, and particularly because I think Ozzy used the fact that one sees the natural world as an artifact, as we said, where some people might want to argue, well, aren't you saying in a sense that the universe itself is by itself a form of revelation of revealing its creator as your conclusion? But there's a sense in which that what you're really talking about is a special revelation, a word from a communique from God to a particular person.
Right. I mean, there's the general revelation, like, is what it's commonly referred to. Natural revelation. And Oz made the reference to it earlier about nature being the book of God, as it were. And there's that, in a sense. But the special revelation, obviously,
we don't need a book. We got a universe.
Yeah, I've got the whole universe. I don't have time for your book. I'm kidding. Okay.
I like it.
Yeah, it might help if people know a little bit about the history of deism and how the term came into popular usage, right? I mean, this is a term that sort of really comes into its own in the European Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And the people who espouse this term, these deists, they choose that word over and against traditional God talk and theistic talk. Deliberately, they are trying to distinguish their position, their philosophical position about a creator, from these faith-based positions that are anchored in revelation, in holy books, in prophecies, in privately delivered religious experiences and things like that. This is so, you have to think about of this in terms of people who were philosophers and early natural scientists who were looking at the world and saying, well, listen, I look in the world and I see beauty, I see order, I see harmony, I see sophistication, I see predictable clockwork mechanisms, I see what looks kind of like an elaborate, sophisticated machine. I see all of this order, complexity, beauty, and harmony built up out of little things, smaller things, simpler systems, right? And modern science has sort of borne this out with physics. So you have these fundamental particles. It's kind of like a box of Legos, right? There's only so many kinds of Lego pieces, right? There's only so many kinds of particles. Everything is made out of a concatenation of these things, out of this limited supply of basic parts, just arranged a certain way. We get all of the enormous diversity of phenomena that we see. And some of these systems in the universe exhibit functions, right? A hand is for grasping, eyes are for seeing, a heart is for pumping, right? Blood. I mean, these things are appear at first blush anyway to be teleological. They appear to be there for a purpose. They serve a function. They serve interests of these organisms. But for these functions, these organisms wouldn't survive at all, wouldn't exist at all. So all of this sort of outlook is predicated on looking at the natural world and seeing that all of this cries out for an explanation. Well, what is the best explanation? That it just poof has happened, right? Or is it Yahweh or Allah, or what's the explanation? And so people who were trying to be empirical, to look at the facts unflinchingly, to not deny the facts in all of their implications, but to not take on a pile of faith-based claims and irrational superstitions that have been handed down to them. People who are trying to look at the facts but not take on all this extra baggage. A lot of these philosophers and natural philosophers came to the conclusion that, yeah, that there was a creator. This is an artifact. And whether this creator intended for us to be here and to apprehend and appreciate it all, or whether that's just a byproduct, well, they diverge on these sorts of things. But
Right.
that is the view that that is the approach that the deists took, that was different from what theists took. And that's why we have this different terminology. And this is why deists today typically don't like to be called theists, even though they both worship a god or believe in a god. I mean, not all deists worship, but some worship. But they yes, there's a god involved in both theism and deism, but the approach is so fundamentally different. The deists don't want to be lumped in with the theists. They see it as a philosophical position, not a religion.
Yeah, well, you know, this is kind of backwards here, because we have the atheist giving an excellent explanation and argument for deism. So let's have the theist give the atheist pushback, and that is, of course, I think the typical view of evolution is that evolution has had time to work these things out, and it has made many mistakes, and they all died. They failed to replicate, and only those things that could successfully replicate did so. And so over time, as changes occur, changes that were not beneficial in any particular generation just stopped right there. Anything that was beneficial or added more sophistication could continue, only because, well, that's all that can remain. And so look, we got a universe here that's some 13 billion years old. That's a lot of time allowed for some rather sophisticated systems to come about. And so, and I would say that that's probably the way an atheist would push back, or am I'm in.
They do. Some of them do in that exact way. And then my question generally to them is, do you realize that in some way you're kind of slipping in this hidden premise in there that God is creator or whatever it is, perfect, and will do everything perfectly and exactly.
I mean, why would the universe simply become a more sophisticated glob of nothingness? I mean, you know, particularly to me, some of the questions that I have that disturb me in terms of trying to make sense of them. Why is love so essential, and why do people thrive when they are truly loved, and why do they fail to thrive when they are not, and where would love come from if it just happened, you know? And that I find a very powerful problem, and yet at the same time, well, that's one of the spandrels of it all. But wow, I'm certainly glad that there's a world in which I've tried to learn what it means to love, and what love means, and how important it is to us. Quite in spite of whether or not we can put it all into perspective.
That was going to be my next question for Shanna. I'm really enjoying what you're saying. But does deism approach what Bob was just talking about, what I would, for lack of a better term, possibly call invisible attributes, love, emotions, things of this nature?
Consciousness.
Whew. All right.
Go for it.
I don't think that deism itself does, because kind of like what Oz touched on earlier, there aren't really doctrines and creeds and, oh, hey, you're a deist now? Here's the answer to the question of why do we fall in love? Why do we need it? Why do we thrive? That's not. So every deist would give a different answer to that. I mean, there's the answer that I lean more towards, that it's a byproduct. We're social animals. We feel this bond, and we need the social interaction. There's all kinds of chemicals firing off in our brains and our bodies, and it's just how it works. It's just the way it is, and we happen to enjoy it, and that's a good thing. It doesn't have to have a higher meaning or be issued from a god for it to be as valuable to us as it is. There's other deists that may answer that differently.
And of course, which is what I was focused on, just the fact that it was one of the possibilities that comes about is itself rather fascinating. But anyhow, I'm curious, Ozzy, is there anything that you might feel we're leaving out that would help to in the listening audience? What I'm hoping they get out of this is a clear understanding of just what deism could be in its all its variations, and what it takes to seriously consider it without regard to if one does or doesn't embrace it. What do you think anything that stands out to you that we're leaving out? You've certainly had more discussions with people along these lines.
Yeah, well, there's all kinds of things we're leaving out. I mean, perhaps most importantly, we're leaving out specific reasons that lead a person to the conclusion that there is a creator God. And maybe we could turn to that momentarily. But one thing that sort of stands out in my mind is, what does one get out of deism? What are the emotional rewards and benefits of this outlook? And I ask that not because I think that, oh well, appealing to rewards and benefits is, should be irrelevant and stuff like that. But every view has attended with it emotional payoffs and emotional costs, right? I mean, if you're an atheist, one of the nice payoffs of being an atheist is you get to go around thinking, yeah, no one's promising me any goodies. I'm not motivated by threats and rewards. I'm interested in the unvarnished truth. You can sort of pat yourself on the back that, hey, my view of life is stark and realistic. You get to feel like you're gritty, roll up your sleeves, a man's man, rugged individual, free thinker. You get to. This is one of the sort of the psychological payoffs of self-identifying as an atheist. A lot of atheists sort of see themselves that way. I think this is a conceit, but people do feel this way. I've felt this way. That is operative in me even as I speak. I can laugh at it in myself. I can recognize it myself, but it's there. It's a payoff. It's there. It's one of the psychological benefits that is conferred by being an atheist. And I'm curious, according to Shanna, what would be some of the emotional benefits and payoffs, the psychological and also intellectual satisfactions of seeing the world as a creation, and thinking of yourself as either the direct or indirect product of a creator, of an intelligent mind?
Well, some of the payoffs, I really didn't realize that I had them until I had a few conversations with you, Oz. I get to see the universe as a creation. Right? I get to see it as this genius mastermind kind of creation. So I'm already awed by nature. I'm already impressed. I'm already, I can look up at the sky at night, watch the stars or the moon, and feel insignificant and one with the universe all in one moment. So I'm already in love with nature, right? But then I get to see it as like a painting, and I get to appreciate it as such, and that's a nice feeling. Beyond that, I kind of get a little bit of what the atheists do too. I get that, yeah, but this is it. There's no God looking after me. I'm big, tough girl that can handle in the world myself. And then there's a little bit of arrogance that comes with it too. I think I'm one of those deists that believe that everything that we need, it has already been given. Like our reason and our compassion and being sentient. These things are sufficient to get to wherever it is that we want to go, for the most part. And that makes me feel kind of special. I like that. So I mean, there's those little things that are rewarding.
Hey guys, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Thanks.
There's Joey.
Hey guys, how's everybody doing? I noticed that nobody has adhered to the policy that Dr. Jones stated at the beginning of this show, where all conversation must be stated in the form of a haiku.
I'm pretty sure that's all I've been doing.
But that's okay. No.
Oh.
We'll review that later. We'll try it on the next show. Anyways, I had a question. Let me begin with a little story. A year or two back, I had Greg Bray and I did a little show called Clash Course, where our intentions were just to try and argue as much as we possibly could. If we agreed, then the show was failing. And there was one show where I told Greg that I was going to present to him, as a theist, a compelling argument for the existence of a God.
And I spent a long time, and ultimately the argument that I made was by all definitions, in my opinion, a deistic argument. And at the end of the show, and I hope he will remember this the same way I do, he admitted that I had won that argument, but he said that I cheated. That he thought we were playing chess, and I just jumped all his pieces and said, "King me." And a statement which I still find to be galling. Oh, but here's the thing. I don't think that I cheated where he thought that I cheated, because what I did was I looked on the websites that are out there, and I found that it was commonly viewed that that deism was a subcategory of theism. And I believe if you even look up these two terms on say Wikipedia, for example, you'll find that it may still be that way. And so I clung to that common view to say that as a theist, I would present a compelling argument for the existence of God. And basically what I did was I defined God as a conscious and willful creator, and that was it. But if I'm honest, I don't know that I agree with that viewpoint, that deism is a subcategory of theism, because deism, just, if I understand anything about it, just be about the only thing that all deists might agree on is that there's an entity that was creative, and that is probably where this universe came from. And it is theism that then goes into specifics. Whatever form of theism you might find, it gets into specifics. And so I wondered how each of you viewed this. Do you believe that deism is a subcategory of theism, or that theism is a subcategory of deism?
Mine will be quick. I think that theism is a subcategory of deism. That's it.
All right.
I agree. Yeah. I think that theism is a cultural modification of something that perhaps began as deism.
Yeah, I think it's actually a complicated question. There's a couple of ways to go with this. I go with deism as a subset of theism, but that's because I define theism as merely a god, any god, including the deistic gods. But of course, you could say, well, wait a minute. No, you could absolutely go the other way and think of theism as basically dressed up forms of deism, right? They're just larded with more assumptions and things that are harder to defend. Somewhat more specific, perhaps, and superstitious. To my mind, it doesn't really matter which way we go, as long as we understand which definition that we're using.
I like the polysemous use of the adjective larded.
Okay, freighted then. Perhaps we could say freighted.
No. Please say larded.
Yeah. When we categorize things, you get a bunch of things in front of you, all these widgets and whatevers, and you're asked to organize them. Well, do you organize them into tiny things, mid-sized things, and big things, or do you organize them into blue things, red things, and yellow things? There's a sense here in which Ptolemy and Copernicus were both right. It's just that from what standpoint are you looking at the planetary motions? So this is really perhaps a question of how do we find it most useful to organize the ideas. And I don't know if they. So to me, it's an organizational question that may be what these things are in and of themselves are. We're just trying to organize them, but they remain distinct.
There's an important thing to keep in mind about deism for those who are actively involved in the Great Debate. When people are arguing with theists, if they're arguing with a fundamentalist of some particular stripe, and why do you believe in God? They won't usually say, "Oh, well, you see, there are these prophecies," and they'll usually start with a more philosophical argument. All right. and they'll give you a cosmological argument. They'll give you the causal argument, the first cause argument, the prime mover argument. Where does that come from? Well, that comes from, let's see, some guy named Aristotle, right? Oh, what was he? He wasn't Christian. He was a deist, right? They'll give you something like the Kalam cosmological argument. Well, that doesn't imply Yahweh or anything like that. I mean, these are the arguments that, at best they get you as far as deism, right? So I mean, and what's funny is a lot of atheists who are involved in these debates will object and say, hey, your argument doesn't get you to the God you worship, right? Okay, maybe it doesn't, but what if it gets you to a God, right? Poof, there goes your atheism, right?
Right.
And so that's why I say, listen, you've got to contend with these arguments, because even if they don't get you to the Christian God, or they don't get you to Allah, or they don't get you to Vishnu, or they don't get you to, whatever, if they get you to the conclusion that they're supposed to get you to, okay, which is that there's some kind of creator, or something like that, then your atheism stands refuted, right? Unless you can refute that argument. You can never sort of say, oh, you can't get to your Christian God, the ultimate conclusion that you would like. You fell short. Well, wait a minute. They got further than you would want them to go. You need to meet that argument. And so I think it's interesting that some of the most long-standing and robust arguments offered in favor of traditional theisms are actually arguments that only get you as far as deism, right. and I think a lot of deists sort of, say, yeah, that, and while a lot of deists will concede, now those arguments aren't very good, some of them will think some of them are good, and I don't think Shanna thinks any of those arguments are any good. Do you think any of those arguments are, Shanna?
No, I'm not a big fan of any of those arguments.
Okay, but some deists are. Some deists will uphold like a prime mover argument or something like that.
Right.
And in which case that argument has to be met. You can't object to it on the grounds that it doesn't get you to a particular God, because if you're arguing that there's no God, you've got to meet that objection all the way. You can point out that, hey, the Christian over there didn't get as far as you wanted to go, right? But you've still got a problem. Your work is still cut out for you.
Right. We're still ignoring the fact that the argument may have just led to a creator.
Right.
I would even say that as an agnostic theist, that I find the arguments are for me nothing other than a paradigmical coherence, and that is, into my way of thinking, inconsequential.
I've got a question for you, Bob.
Well, okay, and then I had a question for Shanna, but what's the question?
My question for you is that if you view theism as a subcategory of deism, how can you call yourself anything more than an agnostic deist?
Well, that's a good question. That is an excellent
kick-ass, Joey.
Yeah, that was really good.
I suppose, it's the same reason why I don't call myself a Christian, but I do sometimes call myself a Jesuist. Deism, theism, they both come from the same word. In a sense, they're just, they're part of the Romance languages, and the TH became a D in the other language. So it's really, but they prefer the other term in order to allow there to be some distance that we then understand. I would say that, and of course, the other night I was talking to Ozzy, and he's saying, "Well, I'm more of an atheist," and the truth is, I'm kind of, a crockpot. Crackpot. I'm a crockpot, kind of theist. So there's a sense in which when I look at Jesus, I see somebody who I have no idea who and what he is. I have no idea who and what I am spiritually, but I like the guy. And I do have a sense that God is present and conscious of me. Now, I can't prove that, but I just say I have a sense of that. And so I suppose in some sense that's not quite deistic, because I feel, and I don't understand the feeling, I'll be honest with you, that there is this presence. And so that there is some sort of interaction, although I don't think it's the kind of thing one can grab hold of, put their finger on, do anything with, and I certainly don't believe in anything. You better believe it, you're going to hell kind of concept. So there's this almost, moderate, somehow, lacking integrity compromise between theism and deism going on there. But yeah, Joey, that's true. Based on many things that I said, it's maybe the categories are a bit artificial for me.
I'm comfortable being called a deist, perfectly comfortable, and possibly even more than agnostic when it comes to deism. But I just think it's funner to take the term theist, because and by many conventional viewpoints,
Sure.
I could call myself a theist, and it's a lot of fun to do so. But I think that I'm probably a deist, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I had a question.
Bob, there's if I may, there's the classical deism, right, where they believe that, and I say they to make that distinction, believe that the creator of the universe just wound up its little clock and then walked away and isn't paying attention to anything and doesn't care, doesn't know, that's more of a classical deism. But there are plenty of deists who are deists and think that this creator or creators is very much aware of us and our presence. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. Right?
I was just going to ask you to define, if you would, the difference between classical and modern deism, and you just did it.
Hey, look, there you go.
Yeah. God must have been whispering in your ear.
Oh, stop it.
Yeah. Well. Anyway, so we talked about that a little bit, Ozzy. What else have we left out?
The big question. I mean, there's like 30 people watching right now, and I know that there'll be a lot of people watching afterwards, and they're all just going to go mental if we don't talk about, what are some of the reasons, some of the arguments that motivate deism, specifically what does Shanna think some of the arguments are. I alluded to some stuff earlier when I was talking about organismal design and function and stuff like that, and sort of the physical building blocks of the universe and stuff like that, all of which beggars a question: why is it this way, right? And that might be answered by positing an intelligence, but I actually know Shanna's mind on this, but
Right.
Other people will be curious. What Shanna, what are your reasons for thinking that there is a creator and that the world is a creation?
Hate this question.
Yeah, well, it's a long answer, but we can start
it's an
anyway.
long answer, ridiculously long answer, and you know that.
Yeah,
If you can't fit it in there, I think that we need to understand that this isn't the sort of question that you can answer even in a show like this and do it the sort of justice that it deserves. So knowing that, just give us what you can.
Okay. I'll kind of kick off what Oz was saying, since he already said a fair bit of what I would say in some sense. Looking at the universe, and we see these itsy bitsy, and it looks like a big machine kind of chugging along. There's arguments from analogy that are my favorites, I think. I take this thing, this universe, this thing where I don't know the source of it, I don't know where it's come from, and then I look and I find something that's similar to it that I do know the source of. And Oz, correct me if I'm wrong, but an argument from analogy is, if thing A has properties A, B, and C, and thing B has properties A, B, and C, and we know that we know that B has additional property Q, we can make the inference that A may also have additional property Q, right? So if I have is that right, Oz? Ish.
Yeah. Well, an analogy is that you're saying that there's. Oh, I'm getting a terrible echo from someone. I think it might be you, Shanna. There we go. An argument from analogy is like you say, although that there's a lot of induction going on there, but that's because we use inductions in the choice of our analogies. But an analogy is to say that A is to B. The relationship between A and B is the same relationship that we see between C and D. So if you look at the natural world taken as a whole, or some specific aspect of it, and you say, okay, I see property, X, Y, and Z. Whence comes property X, Y, and Z? And then you look at some other place, some other context, and you say, hey, here's property X, Y, and Z again. And what is the cause of X, Y, and Z? Oh, it's F over here. Okay, well then by the principle of an analogy, you'll say it's got to be F in the other case. So that's
Right.
analogical reasoning. Yeah.
Right. It's the analogical reasoning, and that's essentially what.
So what is the analogy here? Like what are you seeing in nature that you think calls for an intelligence, and then what and what are you comparing it to in the real world, where we would definitely say, yeah, this was created by an intelligence?
Oh goodness, which one? Which one do you think I should do?
Well, you usually do like the physical building blocks and the physical constants, and you sometimes talk about the DNA and stuff like that. There've been others.
I like the DNA one, and I like the way that the universe works, and then comparing it to the way that how we can make machines, or the way computers work, the way programs work. I see there's a lot of similarities there. And then since we know that
of problem solving, it seems to be, although nobody wants to recommend that the brain is just a computer, there are many analogies that are often made between having algorithms for problem solving, and then the innate capacities of the brain to start just using those abilities and throw them together, and then end up acquiring insights that it didn't have originally. That fascinates me.
If you define God as a conscious and willful creator, in my opinion, there are several different ways that you can demonstrate that in the universe that we live in. And so, thinking abstractly, you may not come to you may not arrive at the kind of God that most people would expect, but I think that you can demonstrate. I think that you can demonstrate creation and a compelling reason to think that this universe was created. But you are right. It would take. I mean, I spent 2 shows with my friend Greg Bray talking about this, and it was a lot of fun. But it took every single minute to get where I wanted to go with it.
Yeah, it's really hard to do this justice, and I think a lot of times, being on the internet like this and having people watching, I feel some pressure, and I know that we all do sometimes. But it's not like you can. And I don't want to insult. I'm not intentionally insulting Christians if this comes off as an insult, but I don't have an easy answer like some of them do. Well, because the Bible tells me so, because I feel it, because I just know. I don't have that for you. My answers have a lot to do with philosophy and logic, and the arguments take a lot of time to go through. I mean, you just can't do them justice in a couple of minutes. You just can't.
Yeah, right. There's a complicating factor. Shanna's view is also tied to something called philosophical idealism, and philosophical idealism is a whole other can of worms. And so, since some of the reasons, a lot of the reasons for her deism have to do with idealism, you first have to sort of mount the argument for idealism, right? So she's a little bit hampered, you're a little bit hobbled by this, but an argument that we've had before, actually, it's on my channel. We talked once about this argument that the DNA resembles a code. We speak of things in the genome coding for. We say that this part of the genome codes for that. Now, that could just be a figure of speech. That could just be a way of describing that this causes that. This codes for that. That just means that this reliably causes that. That would be my view. But Shanna takes a different view of that. And so when she looks at DNA, she looks at something where, look, clearly these structures exist for these purposes. If they didn't exist for these purposes, these organisms wouldn't be around, right? They need these structures. Now, she's not positing that there's a special creator or anything like that. And when we've had this argument, I said, well, listen, we understand that at the level of chemistry why the molecules are doing this. There's no mystery here. You don't have to posit an intelligence. And she's rolling her eyes because every time I've made this argument, she says, well, wait a minute, you're begging the question, though. Why the hell do the chemical properties have the properties that they do? They have the properties just and so that would produce exactly this kind of biochemical machinery, right?
How convenient.
How convenient, right? And so you can say, oh, okay, well, that's because of the physics. That's all explained at the level of the physics. But then she'll say, yeah, but look, why the hell are the laws of physics such that they result in chemical interactions that produce these complex chains of molecules that happen to code for certain structures, right? So I'm sorry, Shanna, I'm doing your work here, but I sense you're trying to.
It sounds to me like we're talking about sometimes a competition of monoaxial thinking, that we have to have just one answer for something. I mean, why can't it be both? That there's an intelligent creator in it, and he did it by creating these things that just work that way. I mean, I don't know that there's ever any answer to that. I have a confession to make, and that is this, that I have a number of ideas that make a great deal of sense to me. And I find that although I run into various other people in this world that I'm fairly convinced are rather intelligent people, I don't find their arguments compelling. and this is the problem I think that we all have, and that I wonder at times to what degree, and this is why I asked that one question about the paradigm at first. I think it's hard for us to think outside of our paradigms because we can put everything into them in a way that makes sense, and it takes a different paradigm to organize it, the exact same stuff. It's as if I'm arguing that I think reality is in many ways our knowledge of it is sparse, and it represents to us an optical illusion. And we can make sense of it in a variety of very different, potentially mutually exclusive ways simply because of the way we've organized it. And it's hard for people to jump ship in the way they've organized it until they reach a crisis within their own paradigm. And so I find that it's because of that I can't take myself too seriously sometimes, because I notice I have the same problem that everyone else I run into has. The things that make sense to me just continue to make sense to me, and the arguments that other people offer, as much as they make sense to them, just don't seem to be able to grab a hold of me to the compelling degree. And so that makes me wonder how much this represents human limitation. I don't know. It leaves me wondering. Anyhow, this has been a great conversation. I'm so glad we've been able to talk about it. I hope we've done deism some justice, some consideration, and that people know that this show isn't going to do it for you. And this just might get you curious and interested. And it takes, well, like you said, you have to read, Thomas Paine and some of these other people, and really understand the history and the development of the notions, the ideas. And Ozzy's got David Hume, Dialogues in Natural History of Religion. Yes. So anyway, any final thoughts here, Daryl, that you might have?
Yeah, I like what you were just saying about our individual paradigms, but one exception, and I think you would agree with this, it seems that lack of information on our part, on the individual's part, whenever we learn something that we didn't understand before, tends to mess up our paradigm and launch us into different directions, possibly. But I've enjoyed the conversation. This has been great.
Yeah, Ozzy, what are your final thoughts here?
Well, I'm a little dissatisfied that we didn't get as far into the conversation as I and other people would like, but that's just the way of these things. We're sort of laying some groundwork here. Maybe we can have follow-up discussions. I know, Bob, I would like to follow up on the discussion that we had last Wednesday. I've had some time to think about it and watch that hangout and reconsider some things. So, I mean, that's how these things go. So I'd definitely like to revisit the question of deism. And if I could leave people with one thought, it's this. And when you're evaluating a position like this, you shouldn't be looking for a conclusive argument, right? You don't have to just abandon your position, right? It's not like, look, I either stick with my position or I abandon my position when I'm evaluating an argument, right? what are the odds that there is going to be a knockdown proof of atheism, a knockdown proof of theism, or a knockdown proof of deism, right? That there's going to be a conclusive proof that Huxleyan agnosticism is true and that God is unknowable in principle, right, to everybody, right? What are the odds that there's going to be a decisive argument that's absolutely conclusive, right? I don't think that we should be expecting anything like that. We shouldn't be demanding that of people. What you should be looking at is, do they have some good reasons, some good justifications for this? Not absolutely conclusive, that compel you to conclude as they do, but are there arguments that suggest, that point in the direction of their conclusion, right? That's how we do things, right? The evidence here, all of these conclusions are going to be underdetermined by the evidence. There's not going to be evidence that absolutely establishes that there's a God, that there's a deity, that there's no God, that a God is unknowable. Right? There's not going to be such an argument. There's unlikely to be evidence that is so conclusive. So you have to weigh these things with the assumption that, okay, look, all that we're going to get are suggestion, hints that point in a certain direction. And then you just have to weigh that and see, okay, on balance, should I be going in that direction? Is that the most plausible direction? Is that the best explanation or the best way of construing the evidence and the data that we have in hand? And if you do it that way, I think that your mind will shift a little bit. And that's a good thing. And if you have to give up some ground, that's great. I mean, I've sometimes said that, Shanna may laugh in my face when I say this, but, I feel like my atheism is hanging by a thread. And it's hanging by a thread because I'm just one good argument away from going, yeah, maybe there is a creator, and then I'll be one. And she's laughing, but she's heard me say these words before. So anyway, so I'm hoping that people will keep that in mind and not insist upon a conclusive argument, right? Because you don't have a conclusive argument for your position, right? And so you're just playing by a double standard if you're insisting on a conclusive reason.
Well said. That's awesome. We should turn that into a clip all by itself there. Joey, did you have any last statement you wanted? I'm serious, Ozzy. That was wonderful. I completely understand, and I really think that there are many reasons why it's difficult to come to that absolute compelling point. Many reasons why. Joey, what did you have to say in closing? And then we'll give the last word to Shanna.
Can our guests see this?
It's the ball.
It's the ball, perhaps.
Has anything that we've discussed tonight fallen outside of this this ball?
Nothing can, right?
I was asked by somebody who I don't know if I even know them. I know somebody with the word jokes in their name, but I don't think it's this person. To do a Dr. Jones imitation. This is the best that I could come up with. He and I spent a lot of time this morning talking about the ball argument, and I got
Really?
a little bit violent with him, a little Aussie violent. You know what I'm saying? Like Wednesday Aussie violent. I got violent with him about this. And is that a new term we can adopt here at NCG? Wednesday Aussie violent. Sure. Yeah, that means aggressive in a friendly way.
Right. WOV, WAV. I love you, Bob.
But I think that there are some things to say about the ball argument, and a lot of people are getting tired of it, so that's why we took a break tonight. But it will be back, and perhaps I'll participate in that discussion as well. That's all for the show. Bob, I'll let you close it out for us.
Well, I want Shanna to offer us her final thought here.
Oh boy. Well, thank you. I had a good time. I want to say that. I think one of the things that I run into the most when discussing deism with either atheists or theists is a lot of them, they're not as interested in the arguments as they claim to be. And when I do present some of these arguments, and I'm not saying all, obviously, but when I do present some of these arguments, they give me a lot of the knee-jerk objections that really have nothing to do with deism or the existence of a creator. For example, and I'll try and be brief, but for example, one of the objections they'll give is like, oh, well, there's pain and suffering in the world. What? Right now, you've just shown that you don't know anything about the argument I just gave, nor the objection that you're giving, or where this even came from. I mean, and that's that's frustrating to talk with people who that want to carry the banner of free thinkers and rational and being reasoned and not even know what's going on. But what they're really interested in is not so much these arguments like they claim, but it's all of the other answers that come with that. Well, what does God want? Why did God do this? What kind of personality does God have? Is God angry at us? Is God, all of these weird questions that that's not what deism is. Those are not the kind of conversations that, well, I mean, I don't mind having those conversations, but generally, when people come to me and want to talk to me about it, that's where they jump to, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that I'm not, as a deist, and I don't know many deists that would claim this to be the case, have all of the answers. This is not, no offense, Christianity or Islam or Buddhism. It's not. I don't think Buddhism does that. But I don't have a book to offer you with all of the answers. What I have and what deism has is it's a conclusion based on the evidence presented by evaluating the evidence and the arguments for, and then seriously evaluating the arguments against. And if you're more for, you're deist. And just think it's important to remember that if you want to go into these conversations, it's important to be calm, it's important to be rational, it's important to be compassionate, and to actually want the answers to the questions that are being asked, and not just be waiting for that, aha, I gotcha, or waiting to throw out the knee-jerk arguments or objections against without taking anything seriously, because it just, essentially it shows that whatever's true isn't what you're after.
I think for many who we might
So I
have
wanted to
discussions
lecture
with,
a little bit for my final thoughts.
I think for many of these people who we might have discussions with, if we could just ask that they be calm, that would be a good first step.
Yeah.
We'll get to the next ones. We'll get to the other things after that. No. That was
Shanna.
not a comment about Ozzy at all. First of all, let me just say that Ozzy is one of the most reasonable, calm,
Absolutely.
rational conversationalists I have ever encountered in my life, and it was so much fun to watch you guys get a little worked up Wednesday. And hey, I love to get worked up. I used to get worked up when I would talk with Greg Bray all the time. And that's fun, and especially if you can walk away from it and remain friends. So yeah, that was not a comment about Ozzy, Bob.
Fun to have all the time either, too. Yeah. Well, anyway, as we come to an end here, Shanna, thank you so much, and I would definitely say that people need to give this genuine and serious consideration. Even ideas that people don't end up accepting. Still are deserving of the kind of respect and consideration and recognition that probably all ideas go a little deeper than we're able to take them if they're not ours, and to keep that in mind. And we're always so impressed with our own thinking that it's difficult to be as gracious and as open to the ideas of others. But thanks so much. I hope that we achieved a purpose, and we'd love to be having you back at some time to explore some of these issues better. Even if Ozzy, if you were able to forward to us what you think some of the real pertinent questions might be that you would think would be good to pursue, then we could have some sort of a structure to try to make sure that we don't dilly-dally with fluff. Or stuff that might not be as pertinent to usefulness. But anyway, so thanks for watching. This has been the place.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
Before we close, I just want to compliment you because I don't know how you get such tremendous high quality sound out of that teeny tiny baby microphone that's next to you. It's incredible. No, the one right next to your face.
On his shoulder.
This is an RE27.
Not that microphone.
No, not that
We all know you're using that little baby microphone that you got for being a good boy at the dentist.
On the shoulder.
Project CS5. That's my best vocal microphone in my recording studio. I love that one.
It's amazing. It's like pocket size. All right.
Yeah.
Close this out.
Okay. This has been the place. And we've enjoyed having you here at our place. We'll see you on Wednesday.
Good night.
Good night.